There is a painful truth that many people spend years trying to avoid. The wound itself is often not what keeps us suffering. It's the way we continue living around it. A person can experience heartbreak 20 years ago and still organize their life around that pain today. A person can be betrayed once and spend decades expecting betrayal from everyone else. A person can be rejected in one chapter of life and silently carry that rejection into every relationship, every opportunity, and every dream that follows. And perhaps the hardest reality of all is this: the past doesn't always stay in the past, because we unknowingly invite it into the present. It sits quietly at the dinner table. It follows us into new relationships. It whispers in our decisions. It shapes what we believe we deserve. Many people think healing means forgetting. They think recovery means reaching a day when the memories disappear, a day when the pain no longer exists, a day when the past has been completely erased. But what if that day never comes? What if healing was never about erasing the past? What if recovery was something entirely different? Think about that for a moment. Some of the wisest people who have ever lived still carried memories of loss, still remembered disappointment, still remembered grief. Yet somehow they were no longer controlled by those experiences. The memory remained, the prison disappeared. And that distinction changes everything. Because many people are fighting the wrong battle. They spend years trying to destroy memories that were never meant to be destroyed. Meanwhile, the real work remains untouched. The work of learning how to live freely even while remembering. The work of carrying the story without becoming trapped inside it. The work of moving forward without denying what happened. Maybe you've felt this yourself. Maybe you've told yourself, "I should be over this by now. I shouldn't still feel this way. Why can't I just move on?" But perhaps the better question is not, "Why can't I forget?" Perhaps the better question is, "Why am I still allowing this wound to decide how I live?" That question changes the entire conversation. Because recovery is not about becoming someone who never suffered. Recovery is about becoming someone who is no longer governed by suffering. And that journey begins with understanding something most people never realize. In this video, we will explore why old wounds continue to control our lives, why trying to erase the past often creates more suffering, and how true recovery allows us to move forward without abandoning our story. But why do old wounds continue influencing us long after the event itself is over? Most people assume that pain ends when circumstances change, yet experience tells us otherwise. A divorce ends. The loneliness remains. The betrayal ends. The distrust remains. The criticism ends. The self-doubt remains. The external event may be over. The internal pattern continues. This is one of the most important truths about emotional healing. Events don't control our lives nearly as much as the meanings we attach to them. Imagine a puppet suspended by invisible strings. From a distance, the puppet appears to move freely, but every movement is being directed from somewhere else. Many adults live exactly this way. Their lives appear independent, yet invisible emotional strings from years ago continue pulling their reactions. A critical parent, a painful breakup, a business failure, a humiliation nobody else remembers. The event may be gone, but the emotional interpretation remains active. Someone who was repeatedly rejected may unconsciously avoid opportunities. Someone who was betrayed may struggle to trust even trustworthy people. Someone who was shamed may spend decades seeking validation, not because they are weak, not because they are broken, but because wounds create stories, and stories become identities. At first, the story sounds harmless. I need to be careful. Then it evolves. People can't be trusted. Eventually it becomes, this is who I am. And once a story becomes identity, it begins controlling behavior. Consider a tree growing beside a strong wind. Year after year, the wind pushes against it. Slowly, the trunk bends. Eventually, the tree grows in a permanent curve. Years later, the wind may disappear, but the shape remains. Many emotional wounds work exactly the same way. The event may have ended long ago, but its influence remains embedded within our habits, fears, and expectations. The challenge is that most people focus only on the memory. They say, I need to stop thinking about it. But healing isn't merely changing thoughts. Healing is examining the shape that experience created inside you, the shape of your fears, the shape of your relationships, the shape of your choices. And when you begin noticing these patterns, something remarkable happens. You stop seeing yourself as damaged. You start seeing yourself as conditioned. And conditioning can be changed. Not overnight, not through force, but through awareness. Awareness is where recovery begins. The moment you notice the strings, they begin losing power. The moment you see the pattern, you stop unconsciously living inside it. And perhaps that's the first step toward freedom. Not denying the wound, not fighting the wound, simply seeing it clearly. If this resonates with you, write, I see the pattern. Because awareness is often the first act of healing. But recognizing the pattern leads to another question. If awareness is the beginning, why do so many people still remain stuck? Why does healing become so difficult for so many people? Because they are trying to accomplish something impossible. They are trying to forget. Think about how often people say, just move on, leave it in the past, forget about it. At first, this sounds reasonable, but the human mind doesn't work that way. The harder we try not to think about something, the more attention we give it. Imagine someone telling you, whatever you do, don't think about a stormy ocean. Immediately, an image appears. The instruction itself creates focus. The same thing happens with emotional pain. When we desperately try to suppress a wound, we often strengthen its influence. The memory becomes something we are constantly monitoring, something we are constantly resisting. And resistance requires energy, a tremendous amount of energy. Imagine holding a beach ball underwater. For a few moments, it's manageable, but eventually your arms grow tired. The pressure increases. The ball wants to rise. The longer you fight it, the more exhausting the battle becomes. Many people spend years doing exactly this with their emotions, holding grief underwater, holding anger underwater, holding disappointment underwater, holding shame underwater. Then one day, they wonder why they feel exhausted. The exhaustion isn't coming from the wound. It's coming from the resistance. Recovery begins changing the relationship. Instead of forcing the beach ball down, you allow it to float beside you. You acknowledge its existence. You stop pretending it isn't there. You stop making your entire life a battle against memory. This does not mean surrendering to pain. It means surrendering the fight against reality. There is a profound difference. One creates suffering. The other creates peace. Imagine standing beside a river. The water represents your experiences. Some memories are beautiful. Others are painful. But notice what happens when you try grabbing the water. It slips through your fingers. You cannot hold it. You cannot freeze it forever. And yet many people spend years trying to do exactly that. They hold on to moments that life has already carried downstream. The past becomes frozen in their minds while life continues moving. Recovery invites us back into the river, not to erase what happened, not to deny what happened, but to continue flowing. One of the greatest misunderstandings about healing is believing that acceptance means approval. It does not. Accepting a painful event does not mean you wanted it. It does not mean it was fair. It does not mean it should have happened. Acceptance simply means acknowledging reality as it is. And reality, whether we like it or not, becomes the starting point for every transformation. The person who keeps arguing with reality remains trapped. The person who accepts reality begins moving. And movement is where healing lives. Perhaps you've experienced this, a moment when you finally stopped asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and started asking, "What do I do with it now?" That shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Because it transforms you from a victim of the past into an active participant in your future. The wound remains part of your story, but it no longer becomes the author. If this message speaks to you, write, "I release the fight." Not because the pain never existed, but because your life deserves more than endless resistance. And once we stop fighting the past, another challenge emerges. A challenge that determines whether recovery becomes possible at all. Because sooner or later, every healing journey reaches a moment when we must decide who we are beyond our wounds. But once we stop fighting the past, another question naturally emerges. And for many people, it is one of the most uncomfortable questions they will ever face. Who are you without your wound? At first, the question may sound strange. Of course you are more than your wound. Of course, your pain does not define you. Most people would agree with those statements intellectually. Yet emotionally, many have spent so many years identifying with their suffering that they no longer know who they are apart from it. The wound becomes familiar. The story becomes familiar. The struggle becomes familiar. And what is familiar often feels safer than what is unknown. This is one reason recovery can feel frightening. Not because healing is dangerous, but because healing requires releasing an identity that has accompanied us for years. Imagine a traveler carrying a heavy backpack through a long journey. Inside are stones collected from every painful experience: a betrayal, a disappointment, a failure, a loss. At first, the traveler carries the backpack because it seems necessary. Over time, the weight becomes exhausting. But eventually, something unexpected happens. The traveler becomes attached to the backpack. It has been there for so long that removing it feels uncomfortable. Who am I without this weight? Who am I if I stop telling this story? Who am I if I stop seeing myself as the person who was hurt? Many people never ask these questions. Instead, they continue carrying emotional burdens long after they have ceased serving any purpose. Not because they want to suffer, but because suffering has become part of how they understand themselves. Perhaps you've seen this in your own life. Someone who constantly revisits an old injustice, someone who repeatedly introduces themselves through past pain, someone whose entire identity revolves around what happened years ago. And perhaps, if we're honest, we've all done this in some way. The mind often builds a home around old wounds, not because the home is comfortable, but because it is familiar. Yet recovery asks us to step outside that house, to discover something deeper, a truth that many people spend their entire lives overlooking. You are not your wound. You are the awareness observing the wound. You are not the grief. You are the one experiencing grief. You are not the fear. You are the one noticing fear. This distinction may seem small, but it changes everything. Imagine sitting beside a storm. Dark clouds fill the sky. Rain falls heavily. Thunder echoes in the distance. If you believe you are the storm, every moment feels overwhelming. But if you recognize that you are the observer of the storm, something shifts. The storm still exists, but it no longer becomes your identity. This is one of the most powerful lessons found in mindfulness, conscious living, and many ancient wisdom traditions. Thoughts come and go. Emotions come and go. Experiences come and go. But there is something within you that remains. The observer, the witness, the deeper self that exists beneath every changing circumstance. Recovery is not becoming someone new. Recovery is remembering who you were before the wound convinced you otherwise. Think about a lake after a storm. The surface becomes turbulent. Waves crash in every direction. Mud rises from the bottom. The water appears chaotic. Yet deep beneath the surface, the lake remains undisturbed. Your deeper nature is much like that lake. Life creates storms. Pain creates turbulence. Loss creates waves. But beneath all of it, there remains a part of you untouched by circumstance. The journey of recovery is learning to reconnect with that place. Not occasionally, not only on good days, but consistently. Because the more connected you become to your deeper self, the less power old wounds have to define you. You begin responding rather than reacting. You begin choosing rather than repeating. You begin living rather than merely surviving. And perhaps for the first time in years, you realize that your future does not have to be a continuation of your past. If this resonates with you, write, "I am more than my story." Because healing often begins the moment we stop confusing our wounds with our identity.